Hi, I'm Ardiantiono, and this is my DICE talk. It's been a pleasure to be here. So I'm Ardi, and today I would like to talk about my PhD on how we could optimize the monitoring and also the conservation of mammals in the tropical forest. It does feels like a PhD defense, but like a public one. So a little bit introduction about me. I studied my work in a professional conservation with WCS 10 years ago, which is like a long time ago. I was part of like a tiger population team where we set up camera traps to estimate the density of tiger in the tropical forest. And after that, I got the privilege to work with some of the coolest animals in Indonesia, or maybe in the world, where we are mostly working on like how we could promote coexistence between humans and Komodo dragons and also Sumatran elephants. And then working in conservation also gives you experience or like a chance to explore so many beautiful places. This is Komodo National Park, and this is for me, it's like until now still the most beautiful places in the world for me. Canterbury also beautiful, so it's my second favorite one. But should go to Komodo. I always say to people, if you go to Indonesia, come and visit Komodo National Park. Indonesia also a very amazing place. Like if you go to do your field work, like you get a chance to explore the culture. We have hundreds of languages, hundreds of ethnicities, and hundreds of food, amazing foods. Especially if you like spicy food, you're definitely gonna love Indonesia. So this basically translated as a hot guy. If you don't like spicy food, we do have sweet food also, but not as good. Like Matt mentioned before, we have so many interesting culture, but also one of interesting one would be like quite a lot of people in Indonesia actually only have one name. And this is the example of what Matt mentioned. Like this is a struggle if you have one name and living in the Western world because they don't have any idea like why you don't have family name. So I got my name as undefined Ardiantiono. My bank account say like my name is XX. I got a joint name with Nick in our paper. So it's very interesting to know that I never expected that gonna happen when I was in Indonesia, but when I came to UK, like I just realized that actually one name can bring you some issue. Oh, that's why we write a paper about that. So I'm quite proud to say that I published in Nature, of basically like rambling about having one name. And I do really think that science needs to be inclusive, like whatever your identity is, whether you only have one name, too many names, or you have special character in your name. And I think it's quite giving some impact, because now Google Scholar can accept one name, ORCID can accept one name, and now the Oryx also changed my name, so it's not undefined Ardiantiono anymore, it's just Ardiantiono. So the lesson learned is like, don't let your name stop you to contribute to science. So today, I would like to talk about my PhD research on these animals. So usually people kind of like asking me like, what is my research about? My short answer would be tiger. And usually that's end the conversation. And I think my family also think that I'm working on tiger and they never ask me what about it. So this is a short answer, but also like if you're seeing more, like there's a more story out of it. Last year, I tried to ask AI to make a picture of my PhD. Didn't work, like you see as this one. I asked them to make a picture in the style of Van Gogh, which is super cool. But it's not working, but it's actually showing something interesting that you go to the forest where the tigers are present or live. You know definitely that tigers live and they are around you, but you go to the forest, you won't see them because they are very cryptic and elusive. They like to avoiding you, but they are next to you. So that's happened a lot in the tropical rainforest because like it's very dense vegetation under the canopy. It's very hard to see the animals. Can you find any animals in this picture? No, right? Because there's no animal there. But the thing is like it's usually happen like you go to the forest like you know like there's like a wild pig or something. They can look at you from far away, but you cannot see them because they're usually like hiding behind the bush or they just run away before they see you. And I usually don't, I tell you what, like, I never see tigers in my life, even though like, I've been in the forest for a couple months, not years. But it's very hard because they usually like know when you come in and they try to avoid you. So seeing broader picture, actually this is just came out today. The Living Planet Index saying that our biodiversity is in decline. We all know that. And it's 73% decline of terrestrial vertebrate population in the last 50 years. But also, like, I think it's really important to see that we are making positive changes. And there are some recovery in some species around the world. And just recently, we have like a study that show using like a scientific data that like we know that conservation works, but it's always good to see that there's actually a scientific data supporting that whatever we are doing at the moment is actually working good and in helping the biodiversity. So to achieve the effective conservation, like it's very important to have like good data. And sometimes like as a conservation practitioner managers, we always asking a question like how much we need to spend, how and where to survey and to conserve. Why are we asking these questions? Because we have limited resources in conservation. For example, if you see this statistic, you will see that we actually have a finance gap of $700 billion every year to conserve the biodiversity across the globe. And the lack of resource, especially like higher in the tropical regions, where you have the highest biodiversity, but also the highest pressure from the human activities. And for example, Indonesia itself, like the requirement to conserve the biodiversity every year is 5 billion. And the current budget allocated for the conservation is only like about 10% out of it. And not saying that we still have a lack of capacity to monitor our wildlife, to do effective conservation also. So we have limited resource, we have limited capacity. So my thesis actually like in the beginning start with a question of like how we could better protect tigers. So I always thinking my thesis about tiger in the beginning. I think like to achieve what we call like effective conservation is really important to have a good data. Like we want to know like whether there are how many of them, where are they distributed, are they doing good or not, and then where we should protect them because we have limited resources. But turn out over the year it's developed. So it's not only asking about like how we could protect tigers, but also like how we could protect wildlife in the tropical forest. And this today, like I will talk about two main parts of my PhD research on how we could optimize the monitoring of the biodiversity, but also like how we could target conservation in a systematic way. So I made this like, I'm gonna show you 3 of my data chapter, but I made this one like a year ago for the 3-minute thesis, so it's gonna look a bit funky, so I hope you don't mind. My first chapter would be about how we could utilize camera traps data to better understand the biodiversity of mammal community across tropical forests, which involve macho tiger and rhinos. And then the second one is like how we could combine different data sets to inform a better information of tiger and prey population. And the last one, like having tiger as our study case, like how we could prioritize area for the conservation in the future, considering tiger distribution and also the threat facing their populations. So I will start from the first one, how we could improve the monitoring. Before I started the data chapter, which is basically like a research where we collect data in the field and analyze it, like Aret and we conducted a literature review. Basically, what we want to know is like what actually the status of wildlife population research in Indonesia, because we are interested with that. And we found some interesting finding. We got 300-ish publications. Almost half of them are actually in Bahasa, or our local language, which kind of like showing that it's really important to not only looking international language publication, because the local language also quite a lot, and they can inform you a lot of important data. We found some findings. We got like some knowledge gap. We found some challenges for the local scientists, like the lack of capacity, the challenge of publishing in an open access journal because it's so expensive, and also the opportunity to utilize the data that we already have. But I want to focus on the 4 knowledge gaps that we identified through our review. The first one would be it's focused on just a few number of species, which is obvious. The bias in geography, they are mostly there's a lot of study in Western Indonesia, which is a bit more developed than the Eastern and the Central one. Then we have a limited study, just a few not a lot of study that use a robust study design and also analysis. And the last one is a lot of study just happening in one time frame. They don't really look at what's going to happen in the future. So it's not a long-term study. I will discuss about this one, and I will tell you in the end how 2 of my data chapters could contribute to addressing this knowledge gap. So for my research, I'm going to bring you to the Leuser landscape. It's in the northern part of Sumatra. It's 2.5 million hectares. It's the largest tropical forest in Sumatra, and it's the only place where you could find the big 4 of mammals in Sumatra. Tigers, rhino, elephants, and orangutans. It is a very nice place, but also pain in the ass to go because they are mostly mountainous. If you see the far side mountain, it can take you about 2 weeks just to get there if you walk. So it's a very challenging field. And as I discussed before, doing a research in tropical forest is very challenging because you don't really see the animals at all. Can I ask, if you could raise your hand, has anyone here ever been to the Southeast Asia tropical rainforest? That's quite a lot. And can someone raise your hand if you ever see either tiger, leopard, or clouded leopard in the forest with your eyes? Just one. Good, it's not only me. So it is challenging, right? I've been to the forest for quite a while and I never see tigers. And also I think because I always in the last, so people always left me, so I never see all the animals. But it is challenging. It is challenging, especially if you want to survey the animals by your eyes using human observation like this, because it's not easy. But for the tropical forest now, the development of technology really helps. Camera traps really changing the research for the wildlife monitoring in the tropical forest because you can set up the camera and then they will basically just active and they're going to take a picture or video of animals that coming past them 24 hours, 7 days a week. And you can get some of nice picture that you can show on your social media. And also in Sumatra, the interesting bit is most of the camera trap survey, they are focusing on tigers because tiger are the flagship species in this island. But camera traps also capture different kind of animals, right? And there's a lot of study that use what we call as a bycatch data to filling the gap of basically the knowledge gap of other species. Some of the publication involve a tapir, carnivore and the prey species, and also small carnivores, and many more. So there's a lot of potential of exploring data from the camera traps. And one of the very important metrics and popular one that you could use by analyzing camera trap data is by looking at the occupancy, which is a proportion of area that a species can inhabit. To say it for simple, you could see in this picture that you could see that tiger and sambar deer, they are mostly occupy the forest. Wild pig maybe in the forest boundary, and you could calculate the occupancy or the probability of tiger occupying the forest and outside the forest. So, and you could also make a map out of it. The cool thing about occupancy is you don't really have to detect the species all the time, because sometimes you could set up a camera and you know the tiger inside this forest, but you don't get the picture. Maybe because the tiger's not walking past through the camera at that time, or basically they just don't like the camera, so they walk behind. So occupancy, if you run in the modeling, they actually could account for that. That's what we call as imperfect detection, which means that you don't have to detect all the species to make an inference of their population status. So my first chapter is talking about how we could explore the data from camera trap surveys. And the background of it is actually that these two species is so popular. They are the flagship species. They got the most funding for the conservation. And everyone said, like, if you protect tigers, if you protect rhino, you will protect like other mammals in the forest. But the question, like, is it true? That's what we wanted to explore in this chapter using the camera traps data. So the cool thing about the camera traps data, they capture like so many pictures of different species. And if you run occupancy model, you could make an estimate of the occupancy distribution. This is Leuser, by the way, I forgot to tell you. You could make like inference or information about the occupancy of the species and the mammal occupancy. So we have 23 species. And also like the species richness. Basically, like you want a higher value. Higher value of community occupancy mean like that area is occupied by more species. Species richness mean that that area also occupied a lot like a different type of species. But biodiversity is not only about occupancy and richness, right? We could see like a different facet of biodiversity. So in our study, we also looking at functional diversity, basically like the ecological function, where you want to see like a diversity of traits of species with different traits that constitute their roles in the ecosystem. So you don't want to have like an area or like a landscape where you have homogeneous like community, where basically you only find pigs, which is herbivore everywhere. You want like a different like composition to run to make the ecosystem function runs better. And the second one is the phylogenetic, which we want to see the evolutionary history of the community. Again, we want like a higher, more diverse evolutionary history. We don't want to have homogeneous one where you only have like 1 or 2 species in that landscape. So using camera traps data, we could actually produce like all of this information, which is super cool. And then what we find is like we try to test like your flagship species, which is like tigers and rhino with different type of species. And we want to see like whether they perform better or not compared to this species. Basically, the top one is the effective or like the top performing umbrella species. The bottom one, not so much. And you could see clearly that charismatic species like tigers, actually they don't perform that well in representing mammal community or mammal biodiversity in Leuser based on our camera trap survey. Instead, we found like other species which in Sumatra is not really popular, is often overlooked in conservation, like sun bear, sambar deer, and clouded leopard. But actually, they are the best one to represent the biodiversity in a different aspect. And lastly, and also you could see like there's no one species there on the top, right? You have like 3 different species. That's why we also suggested to have what we call umbrella fleet. Basically, like you combine a group of top umbrella species to represent a broader biodiversity, because there is no one species that can represent all biodiversity. So that's what we found in our first chapter using a camera traps data. The second one would be like how we could utilize all available data that we have on the ground. Before I said the camera trap is super cool because they can detect like a species all the time, over time. But you could see it clearly when I show you this map that actually it's very expensive to set up a camera. You need to buy the camera and everything. So in Leuser, like we only able to put the camera in a small like area of the landscape, which is not representing like the whole landscape. So you could see there's a bias in the spatial coverage. But also like it's not only camera that we have in our landscape. We have what we call as sign transect, where actually like people walking along the transect and they record species encounter or signs like the tiger tracks like in a systematic way. So you have a different type of data. And then you have what we call as a ranger patrol, which is like nothing to do with biodiv monitoring because they are focusing more on the protection, but actually they also collect like some species detection. So the question would be like, can we combine all of this data? And if we combine them, can we make it like a better inference of, for this case, like tiger and prey, which is sambar deer and wild pig occupancy status. So I want you to focus to ranger patrols, Why? Because they are the most intensive activities. Like the sign transect that I mentioned before, like they only do that like for the whole landscape once in every 10 years. So it's not routine. Camera traps once every 3 years. But ranger patrol, because they focus on the protection, they do that like every week. So in a month, around the national park, there are about 30 patrols. So it's very intensive. There's a lot of data. The problem is it's not systematic. So usually like the ranger only collect like tiger data. They don't really collect prey data. Or when they collect like a wild pig data, they don't collect it like in like systematic way. They just feel like I want to collect it now, but there's a lot of pig there, so I don't need to collect that anymore. So that's a challenge. But the question is like if we combine it with a more systematic data from camera trap, from sign transect, can we make the estimate better? So to do that, we are running occupancy model again, but this one we have what we call as integrated. Basically, like we combine the species detection from these 3 different surveys into one big model. But also, we're gonna build like a different detection model because like each of these activity, they have a different design. They also have their own strengths and biases. And it's been quite challenging to make this model, but I can do it now. To account for the cost effectiveness, and I must proudly say that our study is the first to explore this subject on basically like whether data integration could improve the cost effectiveness of monitoring. So how we calculate that, basically we want to see how much it costs for one team to explore one grid cell of 3 kilometers square, 3 kilometers, and then we have a model that could calculate basically like the optimum number of grid cells needed to achieve a high precision of the occupancy. And then when you combine that, you could compare actually how much the cost is needed to estimate the tiger and prey occupancy if you compare like ranger patrol and with integrated models with different combination data. So how's the result? There's quite a lot of things happen here, but I want to focus on the gray line at the moment with the red arrows. Basically, this line showing that how much the cost needed to achieve the high precision of tiger and prey occupancy. Basically, you want it to be a bit left side because like if you go to right, like it's very expensive. It can cost you about almost $1 million US dollar. And if you see the color line, it's actually like a line based on the integrated model where we combine ranger patrol with different type of data sets. And you could see it clearly already that ranger patrol expensive, integrated reduce the cost so much. Also the same with sambar and also with tigers. The little, what do you call it, this one? The little bar chart actually just showing that how much precision that you will get when you estimate the tiger and prey occupancy under $10,000 budget. So you could see also the precision is much higher when you combine it with other data sets compared to only using ranger patrol. And to visualize this one, if we want to achieve a really high precision, which is standard error of 0.05, you could see that compared to ranger patrol, if you combine it with different data sets, it could reduce the operational cost 2-fold for tigers, 5 for sambar deer, 50 for wild pig. So it's clearly showing there's like a potential or advantage of integrating data in reducing your operational costs. And related to that, we also show that the top picture is like the occupancy map based on the ranger patrol. And you will see that this is the occupancy estimate of tiger and the prey based on ranger patrol only. And then when you combine it with different data sets. So the uncertainty, which is like basically the black line, when you combine it with different data sets, the uncertainty is actually getting smaller and smaller, which means the precision is higher. And you could see that combining 3 different data sets reduced the uncertainty from 20 until 40%. So what we want to say here is like it's a really cool study. And when you combine different data sets, you will see that actually like you could make inference from unstructured data like ranger patrols, but they have a bias, right, because they are unstructured. But when you combine it with camera trap or sign transect, which is more systematic, you could actually reduce the operational cost, but also increase the precision. And actually also increase the accuracy, which I just finished running the model like 2 days ago, so I cannot put in this slide. So coming back to this one, if you remember, like from our review, we found that like there are 4 knowledge gaps from wildlife mammal population study in Indonesia, which also I would say like quite relevant across the tropical regions. And our data chapter actually could contribute to addressing some of these gaps. The first one, the umbrella species, we're using camera traps data, and we could get information not only for tiger, for example, but we could have information for the whole mammal that we could detect through the camera. So we're shifting the focus not only to selected species, but we could see like a broader mammal communities. And they are using occupancy modeling that account for imperfect detection. So they are more robust in informing the species occupancy. The data integration chapters, as you see, is actually could address like the other 3 knowledge gap. The easier one is like because we could use all kind of data, we could utilize all available data. Camera trap is not really common like in the eastern part of Indonesia, but patrol, they always do that like across Indonesia. So you could utilize the patrol data and you could combine it with other monitoring data set that you might have in that area, whether it's like a line transect, whether it's like information from the citizen science, or maybe like a report from the local villagers. So you could combine them, and then hopefully like you could make sure that there's no geographic bias, because like we could utilize all available data. And when you have like a precise estimate, you could make like a strong baseline. So that will be very useful if you want to make a long-term study. So you need like a good baseline before you could kind of like see the changes over time. So my 2 data chapters, or our 2 data chapters, actually have a contribution to improve the monitoring of mammals in the tropical forest. So let's take a break. It's quite long. What I love about camera trap is like you always get like a funny picture like this one, and you could show off when you give a presentation, or like this. And tiger is a very curious animal. They always like want to check like whatever happens. So these 2 tigers, they're checking one of the camera traps. It's good because like they are quite behaved. If you are dealing with elephant, they usually only kick the camera right away. So quite annoying. So the next part of my thesis is like how we could targeting conservation action, and we're focusing on tigers simply because they are the most flagship. They are the flagship animals, and in our landscape, like most of the conservation effort are focusing on tigers and other species like rhinos, elephants, and orangutans. But I would say like tiger is the one that with the most complete data through all the monitoring surveys. So when you want to make a good conservation planning, you definitely need a good data, because like we need to have evidence-based conservation when we're developing our strategies. So my last data chapter is actually try to see like how we could basically like utilize all available data that we have, and also like make a systematic planning to see basically which priority area they are facing high pressure from the human threats within tiger distribution range. So we look at tiger occupancy that we just discussed before, and with like a 3 main threats to the population, which is habitat loss, conflict, and also hunting. When you do like a large-scale survey, usually like you could rely on primary data, which is the one that you collect from the field, or from the secondary data, which actually you get from the public database. So for the primary data, we use data from the integrated model to inform the tiger occupancy. But also we look at the report on human-tiger conflict to make a conflict hotspot. And also we look at the satellite imagery to see like the deforestation risk in the landscape. So all of this data are mostly coming from the field that we analyze. But we also consider like secondary data, because sometimes like quite a lot of study, especially like a large-scale regional or global study, they are using like a secondary data. So basically we want to see like if you're making a conservation planning using this type of data, would that be different when you compare it with primary data? So we use data from IUCN because they usually have the species range that you could use right away. And also like we use a proxy from the satellite imagery. Basically we want to see, for example, forest loss are more likely happen near deforested area, or hunting and conflict are more likely happen near the roads or human settlements. So this is all the layers that we make from the primary data and also like from the secondary data. Secondary data is basically quite simple. We just like counting like the distance from roads or distance from the deforested area. So we combine them into like a prioritization tool called Prioritizer, and then this is what we found. So the blue color shows that this is a high priority, or basically like this area should be prioritized for conservation because they are facing high threat from human activities, but also it's like a quite important area for the tigers. You could see clearly that having different data source give you different conclusions. And we always, like if we could, like we always advocate to use like the best available data. If you have primary data set, use that because they are better in capturing the gradients or like the dynamics on the ground. But in a case where you want to have like a large-scale study, sometimes you don't have data from the field. And that's when you could use secondary data. But you need to consider that if you have a primary data in the future, it's better to use that, especially when you want to make a planning for the conservation. So that's what we found, that we say the choice of data source is really important because they can bring a different inference or different conclusion, and then will affect your conservation management. And of course, there's a lot of ways to do conservation planning. Like you could do it like through like a systematic prioritization, or you could like use the occupancy information and you make like a priority based on that. Or you could combine it with the social information, which is quite funny. 5 years ago, I think this is basically one of my favorite papers until now. And 5 years ago, I read this paper. I was kind of like, oh, this guy is so cool. I want to work with him. And now he's my supervisor. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do conservation planning, but also through our study, we kind of like thinking like there's a lot of ways to improve conservation planning in the future also. The first one is like we're still focusing on tiger, but we definitely could do a multi-species, multi-landscape prioritization. And the cool thing about this kind of tool is like you could do whatever you want. You could change your objective, and then you could use any kind of layer that you want depending on what's your management target. Consider action costs, which we haven't considered yet, because like, for example, if you want to do intervention on the top of mountain, it's much more expensive than the one that near the forest boundary. And the last one would be participatory. Like I think it's really important to involve like the stakeholders throughout this process, so everyone has the sense of belonging. And then when you're making a prioritization, whatever output that you already produce, like they are more likely to be adapted in the policy making. So this is the next step that I hope that we could explore if we want to do more prioritization in the future. So the last bit, effective conservation. So my thesis is all about effective conservation, which is like so jargon, but cool. I have shown you that like my chapter, like I have a 3 data chapter, and they are contributing in improving the monitoring and also targeting conservation actions. Improving monitoring is through like how we could use camera trap data to inform like a broader community occupancy, but also how we could combine different data to inform a better occupancy of tiger and prey. And then using tiger as an example, we show that actually like it's very important to have systematically prioritized where we should allocate our conservation efforts using, like, if available, like a good data that coming from the field. And as you can see, like the chapter, my thesis basically, it involves so many people from so many different organizations, which is very like insightful. I really appreciate working with these people because I've been working with Leuser like about 6-7 years now, but these people have been working for 20 years or something. So they definitely have like a more insight of what happened in the field. And it's always nice to collaborate, like keeping in touch with people, collaborate with people, and getting more insight and improve your paper and your study in the future. And also, like, I must say that it's very important. Basically, like, my thesis won't be possible without these people who go to the field and collect data in the field. These camera trap teams, like, there's one time they go to the forest and stay inside the forest for more than 100 days without getting out at all. There's no way I wouldn't be able to do that. But yeah, I think it's really important to give a shout out to these people because, like, without them, like, we won't get all the data that we could use and analyze to make like a better management recommendation. Conservation is very difficult, like it's a hard work, and I think these people should get like a better pay and better contract in the future. Communities, surely, because basically like the conservation is all about the people who living next to the forest and with the wildlife. And I think it's really important to make sure that everyone have a voice, especially the younger generation. Our work with human-wildlife coexistence, we always make sure that people, the local communities, indigenous communities, always involved in any kind of decision-making. We don't want to make a top-down approach, but we want to make sure that everyone involved and they have a say, and any kind of decision will be approved by everyone. Because basically, like whatever we done, like they are the one who gonna implement that and also who gonna be impacted by all the decisions that we make. So it's very important to involve and make sure we have inclusive conservation. So that's my 4 years of work in 40 minutes. And I already submitted this one last month. People say that PhD is stressful journey. It is stressful. But it's also very rewarding because you got a chance to learn like a new thing. You got a chance to know yourself better, push yourself, hopefully in a good way. But also, like, I think like it's really important to have people around you who supporting you. So I'm really grateful with my team in the lab who always be available when I need a support, when I need a guidance, and especially like this feels like Oscar speech, huh? But I need to say this one, but I just want to say thank you for my supervisory team who are so amazing. If you are wonder who they are the three gentlemen, which is a bit senior up there in the picture. So thank you, Matt, Nick, and Dave for your support, and also like for the friendship with people at DICE and outside DICE, who always like making me feel like it's hard if you're living from Indonesia and you coming here and stay here for 4 years, like to make me feel like Canterbury is my home, because you need to feel comfy to getting through this journey of PhD, which is quite stressful but fun. And I think the last one is like we need to have a big commitment in conservation, but also like it's very important to keep optimistic about our future. Last month I went to Conservation Optimism Summit 3 days after I submitted my thesis. So people say like, what a way to celebrate your submission. But it's a very good experience, and I just like awestruck with like so many creative way in conservation. I think it's very interesting to see like everyone have their own way to contribute to the conservation. For me, and maybe most of us here, is like through science, but everyone have their own way through art and other things. And it's always amazing, like seeing inspiring work from people in conservation optimism, people at DICE in Indonesia and across the globe. It really makes me like optimistic that actually like we definitely can achieve a point where human and wildlife could coexist, and we could protect the nature for a better world. So that's all from me. Thank you. 40 minutes.
Thank you, Ardian, for an amazing talk. Does anybody have any questions?
No.
I didn't want to ask you a question because I know all about the project.
Please don't.
Okay, maybe you could explain a little bit more about how maybe the modelling approaches could be used in the park.
The modeling approach?
Yeah, well, not necessarily the modelling approach, the results of the modelling approach.
Yeah. So this is very exciting because when we share it like to the park, because I always make sure that every time like we already have a new result, like we keep update to the national park where I collaborate more. And they are very excited with the findings, especially the first one is kind of like we try to see that, for example, the umbrella species one, when I said that, I was a bit scared actually when I said like, oh, tiger is not really good. But they're actually excited and they said like, oh yeah, I think we should better monitor the clouded leopard, the sambar deer, and also the sun bear in the future, because we also collect the data of them. So it making change. The integrated model also, they are very keen, but I must admit that it's a bit challenging because we're running like quite an advanced statistical model. But there's an acceptance, there's an awareness of implementing this kind of approach in the future. And I think that's a really good starting point. I think like the new like task would be like how we could make sure it's friendly enough to be implemented by the stakeholders on the ground. Yeah.
Hello, that was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit more about the sort of the training process or what the rangers kind of, because you said that the data is sort of very ad hoc, it's not sort of systematic.
Yeah.
But I mean, can you be confident that they can tell the difference between a tiger and a leopard print, for example? What's the process that they go through?
Yeah. So this one, I think that the challenge of the ranger patrol is like sometimes like they ask the ranger to do too much. So the main goal is like to protect. So basically like the main goal is like to detect illegal activities and make an action of it. But also like sometimes people asking like, I want you to collect all the biodiversity data that you could find. And they are not trained ecologists for that. But they kind of like have like a middle ground where like, please collect threatened species, usually like a charismatic species like tiger, elephant, rhino, orangutan, and the prey species for the tigers. Yeah, there's a challenge of identifying the sign. So in this analysis, for example, like we don't include tiger scat because like when I talk with people on the ground, the ranger patrol, like they are not really sure whether it's a tiger or not. So, but if we're talking about tiger track, like it's very clear, like it's tigers. And luckily we don't have leopard in Sumatra. I don't know why. So some tracks, some signs like can be easily distinguished and the ranger can easily identify them. But to make it more systematic, it's a bit tricky. But now they kind of like try to develop a guideline to make sure that the data collection is more systematic, because they're also thinking that, yeah, we cannot have ranger patrol just to stop the illegal activity, but we also need to have a better data so we could analyze that, not only for the biodiversity, but also like for the illegal activities. Oh, a lot. Yeah.
What kind of data were you collecting with the camera traps? Was it just images, videos, or acoustic recordings?
Yeah, we just collect for Leuser in WCS where I work. We just collect the picture. But I know that some organization in other landscape, they also collect the videos. We only collect images, pictures, because our main aim is to identify the tigers. So we only need the picture of the tigers. That's why we put two cameras actually. So we could have like at both sides of the tigers and we could identify them through the pattern. So we are using image only. We could use videos, but it's so hard to identify them because you need to look at the video for 30 seconds. So yeah, it's just image. Charlene?
So just going off Harald's question as well. So when the rangers are collecting I'm just wondering because years ago we did an experiment with rangers in a very similar fashion to collect data. And we basically developed an app where all they had to do was point, take a picture, and it went to a secondary team for like better confirmation because we had problems in training the rangers. So what's exactly the technicality, or if you've like experimented with such applications or such modes before?
Yeah, there's a system and there's like an apps, a tools we call like a smart, which is like a software to one of them to manage the data. So basically like when the, it's cool now because like you could use using your phone. Basically when you get like a sign, like you could record it right away in your phone, the coordinates, like the type and everything and the pictures, and they will like automatically like put in the database. And then you put that in the smart software. So yeah, there's a way to do that now. It's more systematic, but the challenge at the moment, what I see is like it's not really like a strict guidance of like, do you like how often you need to record the signs, like every 200 meters or something? So it's still like up to the ranger patrol on the ground. But the way they collect the data and they input that, there's like a software called Smart that already like facilitate that. And for example, in Leuser, they have like an operator who basically gonna check the data and make sure, like for example, like if the picture is actually like belong to tigers or not. So they have like a second person who gonna check and verify the data. Alright? Yeah, boleh. Oh, you.
In terms of like connecting with communities on the ground, particularly like younger people, how do you kind of think is the best way to convey that sort of data to them in a way that they're going to understand and engage with, like educationally, or just getting them out there and saying, this is some cool stuff you can do? Like, how do you try and engage?
That's a good question. I think like through education, like I'm not really involved in the education, but what I know from my friends in the office, like what they are doing at the moment, is basically showing the pictures of the animals, kind of like showing that this is what you can find in the forest, and this really excites them. If you have like a nice video, like they love it. And I think in the beginning, like it's really important to make them aware that they have such a cool wildlife in the forest where they live. To better make them like better involved, like I think there's a long process. But one really cool way that I know is like you involve them in the survey. So you could bring them like to survey the orangutan or like set up the camera so they know like how it works. Analysis, we usually involve like an undergrad student or student from the uni. Usually when they have a final project, we could give them a training, and usually we also have a fellowship for the student to make sure that they got the scholarship to do the research, but also like they could have like all the capacity building they need to analyze the data. Aret?
Okay. Just one question. So for your umbrella species, you did mention that Leuser is a hub for charismatic species of Sumatra. But in your results, you compare tigers and other animals. So I'm just wondering what happened with the last three. Are they like a good indicator umbrella, an indicator species for conservation? Or?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that. First of all, I forgot to say that rhino is not performing better than tigers. So I think because rhino is a very rare species also, so they are not really like a good umbrella because you don't really see them everywhere. But also the same case with elephants, because we don't really get a lot of elephant detection because we set up the camera mostly in the mountainous area and they are mostly in the lowland. And for orangutan, because they are on the tree, so we cannot really record them in the camera. That's a quite interesting one because in Kalimantan, where there is no tiger, the orangutan usually you could find them like in front of the camera traps walking on the ground or crawling on the ground. But you don't really see that in Sumatra because they have a tiger who could prey on them.
Thank you. You are a good public speaker.
Thank you.
Amazing chapters, contributed papers. But apart from all that, all the papers and technical issues, what was the single most important thing you learned in these 4 years of journey of the PhD?
It's true that you're going to ask like a hard question. What I really think that what I learned, the most important thing is kind of like, it's not about publishing in the top like journals, making the best analysis, like using the most advanced statistical framework. But I think the most important thing is like make sure like how your research can contribute to the ground, how your research can make sure that it could improve the conservation management. And I really think that that's the most important thing. Like, we could do research, we could contribute to science, but our science is not only for the scientific community, especially when you're working in conservation, but it's more about how we could bring the change on the ground. Oh, that's quite a good one.
Any other questions? One more? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
Arjun,
you.
And thank you very much for coming today. And we've got another DICE talk next month, and news will be coming out about that soon. So I want to just, give a round of applause for Arjun for a fantastic talk.
Thank you.